What happens when the most watched inauguration party in recent memory turns into a battlefield of words, power, and betrayal, all before the night even ends? You won't believe it. But before we dive into this jaw-dropping story, make sure to subscribe to channel name and smash that like button if you love scandalous behind-the-scenes celebrity stories. And don't forget to comment below your first reaction. You'll want to be part of this conversation. The air was electric in the grand hall of the newly inaugurated administration's celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across polished marble floors. Guests in designer suits and glittering gowns sipped champagne, laughing politely. But underneath the laughter, a tension throbbed, an unspoken anticipation that something unexpected would erupt. And then she arrived. The new face of power, fresh from her historic appointment, stepped into the room with that signature calm, measured stride, the kind that could silence a crowd without uttering a word. Cameras clicked frantically, flashes lighting up her every movement. Everyone knew this was the moment she would make her mark, but no one anticipated how. 3 hours earlier, in her quiet, office-lined hallway, she had reviewed the guest list. Names that carried decades of influence, some whose reputations were as fragile as spun glass, stared back at her from the schedule. And she knew, deep down, tonight wasn't going to be a mere ceremony. It was going to be a chessboard. The first whispers started around the bar. "She's here," someone murmured, voice barely audible over the jazz quartet playing in the corner. "She's going to make waves," another added, eyes darting toward the entrance. And then she spoke. A hushed gasp rippled across the room as she turned to face the media cameras clustered at the edge of the hall. Her words were precise, deliberate, and devastating. "You're fired." Silence. Not the polite pause of a room that hadn't heard properly, but a silence that felt like the entire building exhaled at once. Conversations died mid-air, champagne glasses stopped mid-toast, and even the chandeliers seemed to dim under the weight of the declaration. On the other side of the room, the target of her words, a powerhouse of influence, someone who had shaped careers and toppled reputations, stood frozen, the smile that had dominated countless photo ops replaced by disbelief. The hand that had been lifting a glass trembled slightly. "I beg your pardon?" came a sharp voice, more defensive than surprised. "You heard me," she replied, eyes locking with his, unyielding. "Tonight is the start of something different, and you won't be part of it." Gasps, murmurs, and the low hum of camera shutters filled the air. The audience, the party guests, journalists, even social media onlookers streaming live, felt the tension like a physical force pressing against their chests. Some clutched their phones tighter, others froze, unsure if they should retreat or intervene. "You can't just do this here. Not now," he stammered, his usual confidence cracking. The mask of control he wore for decades slipped for the briefest of moments, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. Her voice didn't waver. "I can, I will, and I have." It was more than a statement. It was a message. Power had shifted, authority had been redefined, and the world was watching, holding its breath. Nearby, a host tried to interject, hoping to salvage decorum. Let's not make a scene." But it was too late. The scene had already made itself. Eyes darted between the two figures, whispers becoming louder, and the atmosphere thickened with anticipation. Every camera in the room captured the moment, the close-ups of narrowed eyes, the subtle flinch of a jaw tightening, the invisible current of dominance shifting across the polished floor. Inside her mind, she felt a surge of vindication, tempered by the nerves that came with public confrontation. She had rehearsed this internally for weeks, every possible counter-argument, every defensive tactic. But nothing prepared her for the instant electricity of the room, the way her words had landed like a thunderclap. And then a subtle smile. Not cruel, not celebratory, just an acknowledgement. She had made the first move, and the game had only begun. From the corner, a young intern whispered to a colleague, barely audible, "Did she just fire him? Here?" "Yes," came the trembling reply. And the cameras didn't miss a second. The social media notifications were already buzzing. Live streams were picking it up. Clips of the confrontation would trend within minutes. Memes would flood timelines by the hour. Headlines were already forming in the minds of journalists, each more sensational than the last. This was more than a party. This was history in motion. And it was only the beginning. 3 hours in, and already the power dynamics had shifted. Who would recover? Who would retaliate? And who would crew? The room was still buzzing from the initial shock, but the air had shifted. It was no longer celebration, it was war. Guests whispered behind crystal glasses, their eyes darting between her and him, some trying to process what they had just witnessed, others already calculating how this would affect their own standings. He recovered first, straightening his jacket, forcing the mask of control back onto his face. "Do you even understand what you're doing?" His voice was low, venomous, but controlled, a dangerous combination. "This isn't just a room full of people. There are cameras, live feeds. This will follow you everywhere." She tilted her head, letting the words wash over her, her calm exterior unshaken. "I understand perfectly. It's time for accountability, and tonight, the old rules don't apply." There was a pause, a standoff so thick it felt like the chandeliers themselves might shatter under the tension. A few brave guests whispered warnings. "She's too bold, too direct. This isn't just politics, it's personal." Others, however, exchanged looks of admiration, awed that someone had the audacity to confront a titan in front of the world. The media cameras were relentless, zooming in on every micro-expression. You could see the subtle tightening of her jaw, the faint twitch of his lip, the way each breath carried unspoken challenge. Somewhere, a photographer muttered, "This is going to make front-page news tomorrow, guaranteed." And then it happened. The unexpected twist that no one saw coming. He leaned in slightly, voice dropping into a whisper that only she could hear, though the tension in the room made it audible to all. "You think you can do this without consequences?" Her eyes locked on his, unwavering. "Try me." A ripple went through the audience. It wasn't a question. They all knew the consequences would come. Everyone had their bets, silently calculating who would emerge victorious from this collision of egos and influence. Nearby, the host of the event tried again, more forcefully this time. "Let's not—" She interrupted with a smile, thin and sharp as a blade. "No, we've waited long enough for polite games. Tonight, truth is spoken." The whispers escalated into murmurs, then into audible speculation. Social media notifications were exploding. Within minutes, clips of the confrontation had gone viral. Comments ranged from, "She's fearless," to, "This is reckless." Every second added fuel to the fire. From across the hall, another celebrity, a longtime ally of the man she had fired, stepped closer, voice low but urgent. "Are you insane? You just humiliated him in front of everyone. Do you realize what you've done?" Her gaze flicked toward him briefly, then back to her interlocutor. "I realize exactly what I've done. It's about time someone did what needed to be done." Inside, a storm of emotions raged. Excitement, fear, and a raw, unfiltered thrill. She had crossed a line, yes, but it was a line that needed crossing. Every eye in the room was a mirror reflecting both admiration and envy, and she felt the weight of it pressing against her shoulders, daring her to falter. Meanwhile, he wasn't done. He straightened, regaining composure but not humility. "This isn't over. You think 3 hours into your tenure you've won? You haven't even begun to understand what you're dealing with." She matched him word for word, tone calm but cutting. "And you think you can intimidate me? I've spent my entire life preparing for moments like this." The clash wasn't just verbal, it was theatrical. The guests were caught in the middle of a live drama, witnessing power being challenged in its purest, rawest form. Some cheered silently in their minds, others shivered at the audacity, and everyone understood that nothing in this room or beyond would ever be the same. Then came the first cracks of chaos. One of the event coordinators, sensing the escalating tension, tried to usher the pair toward a private corner. But she refused, shaking her head slightly. "No, this is the room where it happens. If I'm taking responsibility, I'm taking it openly. Let the world see." A hush fell as he stepped back, calculating. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with recognition. She was different. She didn't fear the spectacle. And for the first time, he hesitated, just slightly, in front of an audience that could feel the shift like an earthquake beneath their feet. Guests exchanged hurried messages on their phones. Social media chatter skyrocketed. "Inauguration drama," one text read. "She just fired him on live feed," another exclaimed. The tension was no longer contained. It had spilled into every corner of the digital world. And then the unexpected happened. An ally of hers, someone long quiet in the shadows, stepped forward, whispering encouragement. The murmur barely reached her ears, but it fortified her stance. She was not alone. And now, with the public watching and history recording every second, she knew there was no turning back. By the time the third hour rolled in, the room was no longer a celebration. It had transformed into a battlefield. The chandeliers no longer sparkled with cheer. Their light seemed harsh, exposing every wrinkle of tension, every flicker of doubt in the eyes of those present. What had begun as a single statement had evolved into a war of glances, whispers, and unspoken threats. He circled her, the crowd parting instinctively as though sensing the gravity of the confrontation. His voice was calm, but the steel beneath it was unmistakable. "You've made an enemy tonight, not an ally, and enemies, they do not forget." She met his gaze without flinching, but inside, her heart raced. This was bigger than any scenario she had rehearsed. Every second stretched, taut like a wire about to snap. "I'm aware," she said, voice steady but low enough for only him to hear. "And I am prepared for the consequences." The audience was holding its collective breath. The air vibrated with anticipation, like a storm about to break. Guests whispered in hurried tones, speculation running rampant. Social media notifications were buzzing non-stop. Hashtags were forming, trending, multiplying by the second. "She's fearless," one comment read. "Historic moment," another declared. Suddenly he snapped, not with a shout, but with a precise cutting remark that sliced through the room like a knife. "You think power is a game of words, but power is patience, and patience is strategy. You've made your move, but do you understand what comes next?" Her eyes narrowed slightly. This was the first real crack in her armor, a flash of doubt she barely allowed herself to acknowledge. But she had trained for moments like this. She drew herself up, letting the calm in her voice belie the storm of adrenaline raging inside. "I understand more than you think. I've waited for this moment my entire life, and I will not be intimidated." There was a pause so heavy it seemed to push down on the room itself. Then, unexpectedly, an ally of his stepped forward. A figure known for careful diplomacy, usually the voice of reason. "This isn't how this works," they said, voice trembling, trying to bridge the widening chasm. "Public humiliation isn't necessary. Let's step back." "No," she interrupted sharply, a subtle fire in her eyes. "This isn't about necessity. This is about accountability. If history is going to remember tonight, let it remember courage, not cowardice." The crowd was split, some nodding in silent approval, others flinching at the audacity. Someone whispered, She's rewriting the rules in real time. Then the real chaos began. One of his closest confidants, someone who had stayed loyally in his shadow for decades, suddenly turned, whispering under their breath, barely audible. "You've gone too far. Do you know what this means for all of us?" Her response was quiet, measured, almost deadly in its calm. "I know exactly what it means, and I accept it." The tension snapped like a taut wire. Voices rose, guests arguing softly but heatedly, some trying to defend him, others rallying to her side. The music faltered, a string quartet's melody dissolving into uneasy murmurs. Champagne glasses clinked nervously, forgotten in trembling hands. Cameras swiveled, capturing every nuanced gesture, every flicker of emotion, every sharp intake of breath. He lunged, not physically, but with words, piercing and precise. "You may think you've won tonight, but power is not given, it is taken. And what you've done here will follow you. Publicly, personally. Every step you take will be measured against this moment." Her gaze didn't waver. Instead, she leaned slightly closer, her whisper deliberate and icy. "Let it follow me. I am not afraid. And if history remembers only this night, then so be it. I'd rather be remembered for courage than silence." The room collectively gasped. Some guests covered their mouths, others leaned forward, unable to look away. The atmosphere was electric, a tension so sharp it could be cut with a knife. Every heart was racing, every mind calculating what might happen next. From the balcony, journalists scribbled furiously. One muttered, "This isn't a party. It's a headline. This is going to define her career, and possibly destroy his." And then the subtle but devastating blow came. One of his allies, frustrated by the unfolding spectacle, muttered something too loudly. "She's reckless. You're letting her make a fool of you." She heard it. The words were a spark. She turned, eyes blazing, voice carrying across the room. "Foolishness is not the same as courage. You've confused obedience with power for too long." The room went utterly silent. The clash of egos, the simmering tension, had reached a boiling point. People in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some tried to step away, but all eyes remained locked on the pair. There was a sense, unspoken but unanimous, that something historic had just taken place. 3 hours in, and every social media feed ever. The aftermath hit like a thunderclap. By the 4th hour, the grand hall was no longer a space of celebration. It was a battlefield, littered with the echoes of confrontation. Guests huddled in small clusters, their conversations frantic, speculative, almost conspiratorial. Phones were out, fingers flying across screens as every word, every glance, every subtle movement from the confrontation went viral in real time. She moved through the crowd with the same composed elegance that had started the evening, but now there was something sharper in her eyes, something that had been forged in the fire of conflict. Whispers followed her like shadows. "She did it," one guest murmured, voice tinged with awe. "She actually did it." Meanwhile, he retreated to a corner, face a mask of calculated composure, but eyes burning with the aftershocks of embarrassment and fury. His allies hovered close, murmuring rapid assessments, trying to salvage what remained of the evening's authority. But it was clear. The tide had turned. Outside the hall, social media exploded. Clips of the confrontation flooded every platform, millions of views within minutes. Hashtags trended, debates ignited, and pundits speculated endlessly. "Historic power move," one headline read. "Public humiliation or fearless leadership," asked another. Comments poured in, some praising her audacity, others condemning the public spectacle. The digital world had already become a courtroom, and she was both the accused and the jury. Back inside, a few of the more daring guests approached, offering tentative congratulations. "You were incredible," one whispered, shaking slightly. I've never seen someone stand their ground like that." She nodded politely, but her mind was elsewhere, analyzing, anticipating. She knew the evening was only the start. The real test was how the world outside would react. And then, the whispers began to coalesce into something more structured. Journalists, armed with notes and live feeds, began circling the hall. "Do you have a statement?" they asked, pens poised, cameras ready. She looked directly into the lens, her voice calm but firm. "Tonight was never about me. It was about accountability, transparency, and making clear that no one is untouchable. That message is for everyone." The crowd reacted with a mixture of awe and tension. Some clapped quietly, hesitant but impressed. Others murmured disapprovingly, shifting uneasily. Cameras captured every micro-expression, the subtle smirk of triumph, the fleeting glance of doubt in those she had confronted. Every detail was magnified, every moment dissected. He emerged briefly, attempting to regain composure, but the effort was futile. Reporters pressed, questions flying. "How will you respond to her actions tonight? Do you regret attending this event? Was this a personal attack?" He hesitated, searching for words that could salvage dignity. But the room's collective gaze made it clear. His moment of control had passed. Meanwhile, the murmurs had turned into quiet chaos. Guests who had once mingled freely were now forming alliances, whispering strategies, and calculating where their loyalties would lie. The air was thick with tension, and for the first time, the party felt less like a celebration and more like the eye of a storm about to engulf them all. Outside, the media frenzy escalated. News outlets broadcast live clips. Pundits dissected every word, every glance, every sigh. Social media was a tempest of opinions, some praising her boldness, others criticizing the audacity. Memes circulated within minutes, some mocking, some reverent, but all undeniable proof that tonight had left an indelible mark on the public consciousness. Amid the chaos, she took a brief moment of solitude near the balcony, looking out over the city lights below. Her reflection in the glass was a mixture of triumph and determination. She knew this was only the beginning. The world was watching, history was being written, and every choice from here on would carry the weight of tonight's audacious act. The room gradually began to settle, but the tension remained palpable. Conversations lingered on the confrontation, alliances had shifted, and no one present would forget the words that had shattered the room. "You're fired." And now, dear viewers, it's your turn to weigh in. Was this a bold act of courage, a historic demonstration of leadership, or an overreach with dangerous consequences? Comment below with your opinion, because your perspective matters. And don't forget to subscribe to Channel Roots of Revenge for more explosive, dramatic stories like this one. Stories that bring you behind the velvet rope of power, scandal, and high-stakes confrontation. Tonight, the world witnessed history. The question is, who will survive the storm, and who will crumble under its weight?